And welcome everybody. It's 12 o'clock in the Netherlands and 11 o'clock here in London, where I'm speaking from. Welcome to all of you to this session on social impact measurement in fragile and conflict settings, FCAS, according to the acronym. My name is Mary Martin and I lead the UN Business and Human Security Initiative at LSE Ideas, and I'm moderating today's session. The session takes the form of a prototype testing of a new methodology that applies the ideas of human security and positive peace to private sector engagements with communities. And the proposals that you're going to hear, this methodology, are part of a 2-year program, which we have been running with the United Nations, which looks at how business can engage, can work constructively with local actors in government, in communities, to contribute to sustainable development, peace building and reconciliation. And this session focusing on one really important aspect of that engagement, which is measuring impact and measuring social impact. The feedback and the debate that we're hoping to have this morning will help us to refine and also lead to more field applications, field tests of our methodology. Our next step in our program is to work more closely with companies and with communities in every location in the world and across different sectors to set up human security business partnerships and apply and see if we can refine our methodology. So your feedback today is really important to us. We're going to hear from 4 speakers on the webinar who are going to first present the proposals we have and our approach, and then respond to it. And we invite all of you to pose comments, questions, and debate the proposals. You can do this in 2 ways. You can post a comment or a question in the chat box during the presentations. And then after about 30 minutes, what we will do is go to you, the audience, where we'll have the opportunity to hear questions, comments and responses live. So if you want to speak during this second part of the session, you need to raise your hand using the raise hand function, which is in the participant button on your screen. And I'll try and include as many interventions as possible. I'll recap these instructions when we get to that part of the session. The other item we have, the other component of this session today is a Zoom poll. We have this online poll and that will run throughout the session. And please take part. We have 3 pretty straightforward questions, multiple choice, and a couple will, you'll see one on your screen now, and a couple of others will pop up during the presentation. And you can also see them if you click on the polling button at the bottom of your screen. And it's all part of helping us to test this prototype and incorporate your views. And we hope to share the results of that poll with you at the end. So that's, if you like, the introduction and a bit of housekeeping. And without more ado, let me turn to our first presenters, who are the authors of the discussion paper, which sets out our approach to social impact measurement. We're going to hear first from Mark van Dorp, who has extensive experience working on how business can act more responsibly, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected settings, and also Marcel Smits. Marcel is the CEO of FCAS Impact, which does what it says in the title. And he's also a director of the Institute for Economics and Peace, who are one of the strategic partners of LSE Ideas in our UN programme. Marc and Marcel, would you unmute yourselves if you haven't done so, and the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mary. And good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending where you are. I'd like to start by saying what I usually say when I speak about fragile and conflict-affected settings, which is the phrase that actually a lot of people say that fragility is the new normal. And I think this couldn't be more true in this time of COVID-19 and the whole crisis that we are seeing around us, which actually puts basically the whole world into a more fragile situation. So I think everything we've been doing started before, of course, this COVID-19 pandemic, has even become more relevant in the current setting, also to businesses. And what we see more in general is that businesses face growing public expectations and also an increased demand from investors and their shareholders to contribute in a positive way to the so-called ESG outcomes, environmental, social, and governance, and to the global goals as well, the SDGs. What we see is that there's a great need to show the positive impact, but there's no agreement on how to do that, how to measure that impact. But there is certainly agreement that if companies contribute positively to ESG factors, this will positively influence their profits, especially in the long run. Secondly, companies are increasingly facing greater legal accountability, which leads to higher demands for a proper tracking of these ESG issues and reporting on them. And we can see that in the increasing number of lawsuits that companies are facing. There's also an increasing trend of imposing mandatory human rights due diligence to companies, like we see in the Netherlands currently with a proposed law. And interesting is also to refer to the recently launched initiative for sustainable and responsible business conduct in the Netherlands, the so-called IDVO, which is a coalition of businesses, investors, NGOs, and academics to basically push for more mandatory human rights due diligence and responsible business conduct in a legal setting, because companies are actually looking for a more level playing field. So thirdly, the third problem that we are seeing, and that's more related to our topic, the fragile and conflict affected settings. Especially in those settings, we see that companies are struggling to address the complex and dynamic reality on the ground. They are faced with local conflicts between communities and between the company and communities. There's a lack of government presence, which makes their role completely different from a more a country where there is rule of law and government presence. The high levels of insecurity also play a big role. And in general, what we see is that companies become more aware of their own role as an actor in the conflict or to the conflict. But the problem is that, they often struggle with the question, what is our responsibility as a company? What should we do to solve all these issues? And what is material to our business? So finally, what we also see is that many companies are not really measuring social impact. They are very much focused on environmental impacts, on climate change, on water and and other environmental issues, but deforestation, of course, but much less so focusing on the social impacts because they're so difficult to measure. And instead, they focus on a way to work towards a standard that aims to minimize the negative impacts, instead of, as I said in the beginning, showing what they're contributing in a positive way. So it's all focused on de-risking and on minimizing the risks of facing these legal, the legal problems that they might be facing. And we think that there's a great need to increase the ways in which we can measure social impact. And having said that, I would like to hand over to Marcel.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and hello, everyone. Now, before we start just describing the solutions, I'd just like to point out that if the critical issues like climate change, human rights, ethics, diversity, environment, health, and safety were considered financially material as part of that definition of materiality, I think our research, including the uptake of our research, would have been much easier. But although there are still some companies that like to believe that sustainability risks are not real financial risk, there is a general consensus that an issue can be both material, regardless of whether it's financial or non-financial. So we conclude that the SDGs are material to the companies in FCAS, which then should be reflected in the performance indicators and also reported on. Now, the biggest challenge is identifying the areas of actions of what are the SDGs that are material to the business activity in FCAS, in fragile and conflict-affected settings. For that, we propose a material analysis that works from the ground up to identify which ESG issues are relevant for the company and community and inform the global standards that are applied today. Now, such a localized material analysis can bring to the surface specific issues that have an impact on the community. And we believe that it gives clarity over their corporate responsibility, meet expectations by investors, and lead to benefits for both companies and businesses. Companies and communities. So, by using, we looked at this human security as a possible approach to tackle these issues. By using human security as an approach that essentially connects security, fragility, human rights, and also development, the risks to companies and communities that are spread over multiple dimensions, economic dimensions, so there's economic risks, environmental risks, food security risk, but also political risk, they can be identified more easily through this human security approach. And we believe that it will help to inform the KPIs, the key performance indicators. Now, this approach is offering a way to pull E, S, and G issues together and not miss important connections between them. So for instance, climate issues that cause droughts in certain areas, they affect people's livelihoods, and this in turn can trigger further competition over resources. So those type of relationships can also help identify key thresholds. This when such issues become a threat to people's personal or group security. Now, by bringing together the human elements of security, rights, and developments, we present a simple methodology for localization of the SDG to show which SDGs are most relevant and give guidance on how actions on them can be risk responsive and generate positive impact. I'd like to show that in the next slide, which is essentially just a visualization of the various dimensions of human security and the risks within those dimensions. Now, the point here is that rather than to select SDGs based on their alignment with core business, as the case is the case today, we propose that local risks faced by people form the starting point for possible SDG contributions. So if such an approach is applied by companies, it actually considers or takes into account the interconnectedness between these dimensions and show how E, S, and G are linked and can be prioritized. So all of a sudden, by applying such approach, the SDGs contributions become tangible and multiple. Now, human security and a concept of positive peace work really well together for measuring social impact by business. Essentially, positive peace measures the factors that create and sustain peace in a society. It's a concept that is used by my institute. And what you can also say is that the increasing levels of positive peace in a society, it will offer more human security guarantees for people. So they work as the background conditions that guarantee human security. Now, positive peace therefore serves as a really good measure for a society's resilience against a threat. And because of its systems approach, it can be applied at different levels, nationally and also local. It works in the same way. Because positive peace and ESG also highly correlate, it makes it as an instrument suitable to assess and measure resilience against any risks people and companies face. So it also has the ability to track the total ESG impact of any responses taken. Now, the last point concerns human security partnerships that are valuable for measuring the social impact. Our research shows that companies require much more collaborative solutions if they wish to track and measure their real impact on the ground. And that can be established through a more structured community engagement process. Now, the so-called human security business partnership framework is such a community engagement process. It's an example of an engagement process between companies, communities, and other stakeholders. It offers a guidance model comprising principles that are listed here: local, inclusive, transparent, and a set of shared processes and tools that can ground and direct the interventions. Now, especially in places where structured data is really lacking, consultations and data collections by local organizations as part of the partnership will be very helpful. Such a partnership can be considered an essential new collaborative governance mechanisms to determine ESG factors by the company, agree on impact indicators collectively, and validate the social impact that is measured through this mechanism. That brings me to the end of the presentations. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you, Marcel, and thank you, Mark, for a really succinct presentation of what is, I think, a very rich and deep approach that you've formulated. And if anybody is interested, I hope you are, in reading the whole paper. You can find that on the LSE Ideas website if you put in UN Business and Human Security Initiative. You'll find a copy of the paper and a summary there. I think before we go to our next speakers, we have the second Zoom polling question, which is: what is the most pressing issue that requires more attention when doing business in fragile and conflict settings? I note, I think, from seeing who's on the session, a lot of you from civil society. I think we welcome your views, even if you're not, actively directly engaged in corporate measurements or selecting SDGs. So I think it's very helpful if you can answer that poll question. And put in whatever of your own experience is relevant to that, and also what you've heard from Mark and Marcel. So next I turn to our two respondents, who are both from the private sector. First, we're going to hear from Anna Stikkers. Anna is Head of Sustainability Credit Risk at ABN AMRO. Anna, thank you for joining us. And can you give us your brief reactions and reflections on this issue of measuring social impact? Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. For starters, let me just briefly check whether you can hear me well.
Yep, I can hear you fine. Hopefully.
Yeah. Okay. Just a brief sound check. Yeah. So indeed, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for having me also. So indeed, my role within ABN AMRO really is the ESG due diligence of our corporate clients. Because, well, so far we've talked about the responsibility of companies, but there is, of course, also a responsibility that banks have. And this responsibility very much stems from our relationship with these corporate players through our credit relationships with these companies. So in here, I would like to highlight two developments that I see and that I think that this research and this new methodology can be very helpful for us as financial institutions. So the first one is that traditionally speaking, the field of sustainability or ESG risk has been focused very much on the preventing of harm. And what we see is that there's more and more a development in which we as a bank not only expect our companies to prevent harm, but also to actually make a positive contribution. So to do good in a sense. And here, the interesting thing is that these two are actually very much interlinked. And this is something that the methodology also shows by using the concept of positive peace and seeing that as a continuum. That very much helps us in making the connection with our clients between their risk management and the way that they can maybe also very much implement often their ambitions to be a responsible corporate citizen, or however the company chooses to phrase that ambition exactly. But to really make the two interlinked, and therefore having it as an integral part of the business activities. Because what you tend to see, especially a couple of years ago, was mostly often the case, is that companies would have a part risk management and they would have a part maybe a foundation-like activities. And what we are striving for in our dialogue with our clients is very much to have those two combined. However, those two concepts are not always very much seen yet to be interlinked. So these kinds of concepts can very much help in bringing the two together. So that's the first development. And the other one that I'd like to emphasize a little bit here is the developments from ESG risk. ESG risk due diligence, moving from the qualitative sphere into the more quantitative and also financial impact or potential financial impact realm. So in order to do that, then it is, of course, very important to have these kinds of metrics and to have these kinds of methodologies to actually make impacts quantified and to translate them into financial risks. However, for social impact, that is very complicated to do. Actually, for environmental impact, it's already very difficult to do. However, that's a little bit more straightforward, and we do see that more and more companies and also more and more financial institutions are already doing this. And so what I very much like about this methodology, and it has also just been mentioned by the previous speakers, is that there is a connection between the environmental and the social. It's all part of being a responsible corporate player, and to have more of these connections between the different topics will definitely help us in quantifying it, and therefore also taking it into account in our financial and credit decisions. So I think that would be my main feedback for now, very much these two developments. So I'm very eager also to hear the rest of the audience's responses. And yeah, and thank you all for the good work that you've been doing with this research.
Anna, thank you very much. That was in a very short time. You covered all the some very key points. And I think what struck me really first off when you began speaking, which I think is an important point to note, is the role in this in these debates of what we might call intermediaries. You know, we've, I think, very much in the past focused on companies and even certain sectors themselves. But the really significant role now that financial investors, lenders, consultancy firms, and so on can play in shifting this debate and in encouraging practice change. And I think for me, another important point that you made was the challenge of making key connections across the spectrum between, as you say, ESG, that they're all part of one, and not seeing these as kind of silo objectives or goals and targets. And I would say also connecting different levels. I think this is what we've tried to do in our UN program very much. How do you develop guidance and tools and processes which don't just stay stranded either at headquarters level, you know, in bank boardrooms or corporate boardrooms, or conversely at grassroots, but that somehow we have integrated processes that mainstream what is taking place at ground level in communities with corporate and financial strategies. So thank you very much for such an on-the-point presentation. Let me next turn to our second respondent, Remco Slim. Remco is product manager at the research firm Sustainalytics, which focuses specifically on ESG. Remco, we're looking forward to hearing from you what your reactions and experiences are in this field. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mary. Indeed, I'm Sustainalytics, ESG, environmental, social and governance research firm. I'm responsible for a research on global standards, thereby being United Nations Guiding Principles, Global Compact and OECD norms, among others, and also our Human Rights Radar, which is focusing on multinationals being active in conflict-affected regions and occupied or disputed territories, and all aimed at helping investors to comply with their requirements to do due diligence on their portfolios or to engage with these companies. In terms of the approach that is being proposed here. We at Sustainalytics very much recognize the need to make more impact-related and positive impact-related data insightful. But we also see a challenge with regard to how to develop metrics and measure disclosure, because the disclosure in the end has to come from companies and civil society, and to turn that into, as Anna also already mentioned, into usable metrics and also figures to compare companies against each other. So observing that currently there's a lot of emphasis still on risk avoidance and avoiding negative impact that do no harm. There's absolutely a need that we see among our clients, mostly investors, to also measure the do good part, to actually measure the sustainable effect. And also in light of the developments that investors have contributed or committed to contribute to SDGs and desire to measure these. And also requiring the investee companies to start reporting on impact and SDGs. So I believe that this solution and this prototype could really be helpful to form a discussion about what to measure and how this can be improved. I think there are several trends that would support this to really scale this, in my view. You can think of, as example, the commitments made by investors that could lead this, but also requirements from regulatory bodies that might not speak directly to human security factors. But for example, they do note that fund managers in 2 years' time should start reporting on the social ratings of their funds. Factors in social rating according to the EU are how companies behave as subject to international treaties and conventions. Furthermore, how fundamental ILO norms are being respected at the company in their activities. However, we see at Sustainalytics a huge data gap, and indeed a company's reporting is not consistent on this front. Also because it's very expensive, right, to measure and engage with local stakeholders, and do this properly takes a lot of time and effort, and is often seen as a cost for the companies and thereby for the investor. So we need to work really to scale this. In my view, we need to look at the business case as well, and to ensure that the financial industry can also contribute to these goals, and make sure that the companies who do good are also seeing this in their top line, in their revenues. But that's an ideal scenario, of course. I would like to conclude with highlighting that Sustainalytics, we're also prototyping and thinking about positive impact metrics and how we can develop proxies to measure this. And I saw a question about like how human security is an approach rather than an ambition. And also with Sustainalytics, we think about this, and we find it important to really follow the objectives approach. So focus on the ultimate impact. Concrete, you have the SDG decent work, but we see that more as a means to an end, and the end goal should be human development and human progress. So we try to, in a development and thinking, try to look at company disclosure and also reporting with civil society on how we can incorporate and develop indicators to compare companies with each other. And it would be great, therefore, to have a framework that incorporates local risks and also local, and with that also the involvement of local communities, and especially in fragile states, to actually identify the issues that that are there and how companies can contribute to the development. And therefore, I think this thinking is very important. Yeah, a challenge will be to think about how we can scale and turn it into indicators that we then can provide to investors, and to turn qualitative data into financial measurable factors. Thank you.
Remco, thank you very much. Again, brilliantly on time, and I think bringing us to the practicalities of this challenge. This discussion paper that you heard Marc and Marcel outline, we did that with one of the key tools for generating these proposals was a roundtable, 2-day roundtable that we held in The Hague in February. And I think one of the most striking things that came back from that, there were business representatives, but also government and civil society and academia, was that the complexity clearly of this, and often companies and indeed all users are rather overwhelmed by having to do something different, something new, and the sheer practicality of getting the right data and so on. I think, Remco, what you highlighted were just some key, both some positive incentives and some key issues to confront around having usable metrics for disclosure. I think the lack of consistency is certainly one area that government and even civil society standard setters can think about more, and a basis for comparison. I think that kind of comparative factor to egg companies on to do well is really important. And I think it also takes me to a comment in the chat box. Thank you for a contribution from CSPPS about a publication by Oxfam, Novid and SOMO. What we've always said in our program and in this approach to social impact measurement, we're not trying to reinvent a wheel. What we're trying to do is suggest an approach that all users can adopt that would fit in with what they're already doing, but add some important refinements. And I think that that emphasis on engagement with local communities through the partnership process is one such example. Let me turn now to the last part of our session, which gives you an opportunity to ask questions. But before we do that, we have one more polling question, which you can see on your screen now. And this is to get a quick feedback from you about the approach that we've presented. If you can give a kind of rather snap and overarching judgment, but I think it helps us just to direct our future work. This poll, and apologies if we whipped the previous poll questions away too quickly. I think you can see them in the polling box on your that's accessible from your screens, but this one will be up for a little bit longer if you need more time to think about your reply. Meanwhile, let us go to some audience questions. And as I mentioned at the outset, if you want to ask a live question, the thing to do is to go to the participant button at the bottom of your screen, and then in that there should be a hands up, which I can't see at the moment, but there should be a hands up function. If that doesn't work, then please just post a question in the chat function, and I'll read them out. We had a question from Gemma, which I think Remco referred to, which was about human security. I think people are very hopefully familiar with it as a concept, as a kind of end goal and objective. But Gemma's question was, how is it an approach? And perhaps, I mean, Remco answered that as well, but perhaps we could turn that to Marc or Marcel if you wanted to just elaborate on how in our proposals human security is, if you like, part of the methodology, not just a nice thing that we want to end up at.
Yes, I could say a few things about that. It is used Yeah, I think it was touched on by several of the respondents, by both Remco and as well as by Anne, that it's used as a methodology or as an approach to make the connections, right, between various issues, various risks that are faced, and its approach is used as an approach that really works from the ground up. So looking really what it means for the impact on communities and on companies operating or investing in the area where communities live and work. So in that sense, and as another more as a measurement approach, it can be used by also collecting the data, which Remco indicated as one of the things that are key at the moment, as a way to make sure that you grasp the indicators that they're useful and that are actually measuring the impact on the communities.
Thanks, Marcel. I think, as you say, I mean, in our program, we've very much taken human security as a methodology, using the principles of people-centered and bottom-up, so local context matters, and also this idea of which is core to human security, of prevention, protection rather, and empowerment. So I think one of the novel things we think about this approach is that it integrates a very interactive and relational dynamic in the whole measurement process. I think one of the drawbacks perhaps of the status quo is that indeed all actors, but companies particularly, are used to doing monitoring and evaluation and assessment, but they do it in a rather kind of unidirectional way. So what we're trying to substitute here is a much more interactive and relational process in which the people who clearly are on the receiving end of impacts and social impacts have a say, that's the empowerment bit, have a say in how they feel, corporate interventions, investments and engagements with the community have affected them. Right, let me see if I have more questions. I can't see any particularly at the in the box, but that may be my technical failing. Do use either the chat function or if you can find the raise hand to ask any further questions. Can I go back perhaps to all of you speakers on the panel to ask a bit more about what you see as the incentives? I think you've all in various ways touched on why users should adopt a new approach. I do believe we are at a sort of, not to overstate it, a sort of paradigm shift, if you like, in the way that business works with society. And several of you have mentioned this going beyond do no harm and into a much more positive kind of proactive role for companies. But I think, as Remco also mentioned, these things can be costly, they're difficult, it's beset by real practical considerations. So perhaps we could just come back and think about, what are for each of you, what are the kind of key incentives? Anna, perhaps I could start with you on that one.
Yes, sure. So then you mean the key incentives for companies to really start measuring more the social impact?
Yeah,
right?
be more proactive, yeah.
Yeah. Well, in terms of incentives, I think there's always a myriad of factors coming into play, and that won't necessarily be the same, I think, for each company. For some companies, the internal push may be very strong. Some companies are becoming more and more outspoken on their purpose as a company, being extending beyond simply generating profit, but really wanting to make a contribution to society. Whereas for other companies, it may be a little bit more reputational, driven from a reputational perspective. That could also be the case. And then there's, of course, a role for investors, like we are in financial institutions, to also give this push. So here I think society, regulator, companies, financial institutions, all of us have our own role to play in that sense, and to be to be proactive ourselves, and extend incentives to the parties that we may have an influence on, that we may be able to influence. So that's one thing. Another thing that I see is that companies do, I think there's more and more an awareness in also the private sector that it's not so much anymore about either about generating profit, or if you do want to do something good, that can be a foundation-like activity, you know, like, well, we have this factory, or we have this industrial activity here, and then maybe to mitigate a little bit the impact or the risks, we will also, I don't know, build a school or build a hospital. And what you do see more and more is that in order for companies to actually have a good relationship with the local communities, they need to do more than that. And they need to really integrate this, the efforts that they make to actually have this relationship, a good relationship with the local communities, to make that part of their business. So then if you start thinking in that way, then of course you will start to think about the role that you have as a company in society in a different way. And I think that is also increasingly an incentive for companies to do, because if you think about traditional risk management, then of course it's like, well, we need to have a good relationship with local communities because we do not want them to protest against us. We do not want conflict there. And I think there's more and more this awareness in companies that not only from this purpose and being a good company, so to say, but also that it's simply beneficial for them to not just have a neutral relationship with local communities, but actually have a positive one. And then what that means, that's very that will depend on each local context. And if the context is maybe fragile, maybe there's conflict, then it's more complex, and a company will have to do a little bit more effort to see, well, what tailor-made decision can be made here. And that then also brings me again to this kind of methodology, and where this may help is that since these efforts are so context specific, like Remco also mentioned, it can be costly, or actually I think, you know, it will always be costly. However, if companies are able to sort of like pick and choose from a certain toolbox, that will make it easier already for them, which will also help maybe bringing the costs down. And it will also help them in really identifying whether the efforts that they put in, whether that actually yields the results that they want, and then not necessarily maybe in an indirect way that will be financial results, but in a direct way it will be translated into better relationship with the local communities and therefore a more stable business environment.
Great, Anna, thank you very much. I think you just illustrated also that the different dimensions of incentive and impetus that can exist. I've got some questions from the audience. So a couple of questions I'm going to take together. I'm going to see if Gemma has asked a question. I'm going to see if I can get Gemma to pose it, if I can unmute you. Maybe I can't.
Oh, yes, you have.
Okay.
Sorry, but then I should perhaps also switch on the camera so it's not a black box talking to you.
Gemma, can you ask your question?
Yes.
And then before we answer it, I've got another companion one. So go ahead. Welcome.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I've been struck by how both of you, or Mark and Remco and yourself, have stressed this relational, collaborative aspect. But my question is about how and to what degree this will allow for closing the considerable gap that you will, I think, unavoidably find between communities and companies. So collaborative sounds easy, doing it and making it effective and making also the voices of community really being taken into account. It's a huge challenge. I think that's what we learn from the field of land governance. So I was just wondering to hear your views and experiences.
Thank you. I think a related question I've got from Liana as well. Liana, can you, can we get you up?
Yes, sure. Hi.
Yeah, hi, welcome. You had some question or a comment that was related to that. Do you want to tell us about that?
No, I just wanted to, I think that what Gemma was saying was really important, this kind of power dynamic and that relational aspect of it. And then just thinking for those of us sort of working in conflict and fragile settings, a lot of our focus is about how to make sure that the voice of excluded and marginalized groups within communities are also being heard. So the question was just looking at, it is just about how perhaps that's going one level more granular, but in that engagement with communities, in what way does the particular vulnerabilities of excluded, marginalized, or those disproportionately impacted by the effects of business be heard? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Mark and Marcel, do you want to have a go at those issues of collaboration and inclusion?
Yes, I can answer this question based on my own experience in working with companies in conflict-affected areas. What we see in practice is that often companies, they enter a certain area and then connect to people that say that they represent the communities, which often is not really the case. And because the company lacks the capacity to do a proper conflict analysis and a power dynamics mapping, they often enter in a way that's really like almost a recipe for disaster. And what we advise those companies is to take a step back and to look at, who are you really talking to, and are you really reaching out to everyone? Is it an inclusive approach? Are you indeed talking to the most marginalized people as well? And to really have a better view on the way you're dealing with social issues. And I think that's part and parcel of our approach, is that we take this holistic approach where you are no longer looking inside out, but more going outside in. and using local expertise, local NGOs, to really get a better grip on, who we are dealing with and how best to deal with that situation in the local context. As Anne was also stressing, I think that's really crucial. There's no blueprint for how to do that, but you have to adapt your strategy according to the context.
If I can just add to that more from the measurement angle. So yes, when we're talking about power dynamics and people being excluded, especially to address those, if you want to address power dynamics and make it more equal, then obviously somebody needs to give up power. So it's a very sensitive issue. It's very difficult to do. So what we're talking about in terms of the approach and the process, that it's very challenging. It requires a lengthy engagement process. But we are saying measurements can help with that, because if we're, as Mark indicated, you do a proper analysis and you identify those that are excluded, then perhaps you can, as a company, would help one way. If land access is an issue, and the company has the ability to do something about that, is that immediately also helping, indirectly or directly, with bringing in groups that are excluded and making it more inclusive in terms of land access and access to water or access to electricity. Those things you can measure over time. So the idea would be to actually have a baseline when you start the engagement process on a number of issues that are relevant for the communities, and start tracking and measuring over time to see any actions that are decided by this partnership based on specific indicators that should measure these issues, including exclusion, including trust, including power dynamics, whether that changes over time.
Thank you, Marcel. I've got a very quick final question. Perhaps anybody can jump in on from Jack, who asks, really Remco and Marcel, actually, do you have examples of indicators that you are using? Remco, can you give us some pointers, give Jack some pointers on that?
Yeah, indeed. So coming back to indeed the objective, and then setting first objective, for instance, resource security or basic needs, human development. And what you do as an ESG data provider, you try to develop measurable indicators from that. So what we're currently exploring also relates to positive impact is, for example, when you think of resource security, you need to identify for certain sectors, it might be not an issue, but many sectors, it is an issue for the community. And you can think of for water scarcity. And what we then, if you identify a company in a sector in a fertile state where water is an issue, you would like then to set an indicator for those companies and try to measure what the water withdrawal level is. And then also that water withdrawal versus their production. Another example, when you think about basic needs, is for companies in real estate, whether they provide affordable housing programs as part of their portfolio. So you try to make a measurement that is comparable and still measures the overall objective, and also what the company is providing as an input, and then the output towards that goal, which is that people have access to water or access to affordable housing. And then in terms of an indicator example, which is already incorporated also in terms of a risk measurement with regard to local communities, and that is that we expect from sectors or companies and sectors where this is in particularly salient and material, that they ensure that they have community relations programs that are operated locally, and that there's also a system in place to actually approve to which indigenous community or leaders they're speaking, so that there is oversight on the governance of with whom the company is speaking to for free and prior informed consent, etc. And that's then also measured. Like, does a company have provide disclosure on that they have such a program in place to measure this, and that's then put into a number and a weight to make it comparable.
Thank you, Remco. I'm going to jump in because time is short, and an answer for Marcel, because I think Marcel, probably correct me if I'm wrong, but the indicators that you would point to are really set out in your paper. There's quite an extensive and detailed explanation of how to use particularly the positive peace indicators. So I would urge you to go to that, and Alice has posted the actual link where you can go to the paper. So it's left to me to wrap up incredibly quickly. I think what we wanted to get across in this presentation was that this is an approach which which suggests a localized material analysis using human security, which is human-centered, holistic, and a phrase that I think Leanne used, fine-grained, and as Mark mentioned, this outside-in dynamic. In order, why that? We think it gives clarity as to what are the key ESG issues. Also, where are the limits of corporate responsibility and which kind of SDGs to target. And I think apart from the localized material analysis, the other point is that this has to be a process which is interactive and collaborative. And I think as was just mentioned, when you're dealing with difficult contextual conditions, particularly in FCAS, where you have these asymmetries of power, trying to factor that in through a specific mechanism for dialogue as part of the measurement process, and that the measurement process and the engagement are mutually reinforcing. Finally, I mean, our poll results. Interesting that on issue 2, I think you can find them if you go to the polling tab. Issue 2, you've overwhelmingly said that engagement with local communities and under that sort of rubric of social license to operate is the most pressing issue. And we're encouraged that you think that these proposals go in the direction of providing some beneficial help. We rely on you and continued engagement with you to help us refine those proposals, and also to deal with some of the very practical issues that some of our presenters have highlighted. Thank you, a lot of thank yous. Thank you to all our presenters this morning. A particular thank you also to KPRSRL for putting on this conference, which I know has been challenging in the current circumstances. And the person you can't see but is key to this session is Denise, who's managing the technicals. So thank you, Denise. And thank you to all of you for participating, for your comments and questions, and please keep them coming. You've got the link, I think, in the chat box, and do get in touch if you'd like to know more, or if you can think how we can work also with you, because I know some of you are also working around this area with your own kind of approaches and tools. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of conference and rest of day, and perhaps we can all wave goodbye to each other in the absence of proper contact. Bye.
Bye.